Hi, everyone. Welcome back to First Principles. Today we've got Jonathan with us. Jonathan is a Scrum Master. How are you, Jonathan?
I'm doing great. It's a wonderful Sunday. How are you, Saagar?
I'm very well. So tell us something about yourself, Jonathan.
Sure, yeah. So I've been a Scrum Master for a little over 4 years. That's professional experience.
Hmm.
And then off to the side, I've done some volunteering in the Scrum world and project coordination world. My professional background is mostly in tech,
Right.
with some education background. But if we focus strictly on Scrum Master, it's been in tech with some big companies. So I
Nice.
have a nice journey there so
Perfect.
far.
So we've got just the right person then. So let's just just dive deep, right? So what's the point of Scrum? What is Scrum? Where does it come in? Give us your one-on-one, sorry.
Right on. So I like to always preface with scrum.org, like kind of like
Hmm.
where like sources and then kind of grow off of that.
Right.
Now, scrum.org, if your audience isn't familiar, this is a place where you can get a lot of the actual foundational information, and I always recommend it. They look at it more of a they have like an actual definition that's an empirical process that's based off of empiricism, where anything you do, they want to use evidence to influence your decisions and your changes for the
Okay.
next round.
Okay.
So they want to take stuff that's maybe abstract,
Right.
put it in a objective format, and use that. And they want it to be collaborative. I'm very much generalizing this,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's about also providing value in an iterative process too.
Right. Okay. So some keywords that I've just taken is empiricism,
Yes,
iterative process, and then what collaborative. Okay.
yes.
But I guess let's just sort of like go back as well. Like, why are we doing it? It when does Scrum come in? What's the objective, larger objective?
Okay, so let me give a little context of where kind of Scrum came involved. Now, I'm going
Right.
to speak mostly on like a software side of things.
Okay.
Back in the early 90s is when Scrum was invented.
Hmm.
And that kind of came out of the frustrations of projects being not being able to deliver, or waste of money, waste of time, waste of resources. And
Hmm.
I'm strictly focusing on tech here in this
Okay.
example. So tech used traditional project management. It still does to this day, but there were people involved that said, "Hey, things are could be much better. Why are we
Hmm.
building you something and then 8 months, 9 months, 12 months later, giving you some of the work or the whole project?" And you look at it and you're like, "I asked for a boat. You built me a car."
Hmm.
How do you prevent millions of dollars of being wasted? How do you prevent that? Well, these folks
Right.
got together and they came up with values and principles, and over the years they shaped it and reformatted it over time. So they sculpted it to what it
Right.
is today.
Right.
And so so they take the empiricism part of it. What can we do out of all this and use actual data to help change our decisions? But also, we need to involve those that are going to use the product, the
Right.
stakeholders, the end users. And
Right.
we should bring them in earlier. We shouldn't wait 12 months. Why are we not bringing them in early? That's just silly.
Right.
So they want to also build out of that project something that's potentially shippable. So
Right.
if you're building a car and you're installing some new type of feature, maybe a new type of seat that
Right.
has seat warmers, or it's seat cooling. Instead of building the entire car and then adding those features and then showing the people, look what we built,
Right.
rather they get the seats ready and then they have them test the seats instead of the whole car. So you can build a portion of it that's potentially shippable,
Right.
usable, and get feedback sooner, so that, okay, we're on the right track. And if you need to make changes, you now do it earlier instead of
Hmm.
later.
Hmm.
Because if you do it later, you're compounding your problems.
Yeah.
And so you really you really want to bring in those stakeholders early and get feedback. So those little
Hmm.
feedback loops is a huge core of Scrum. If not, arguably that is Scrum.
Okay. The feedback loop is Scrum.
In pieces, yes, you do it
Okay.
in little pieces, consistent
Right.
pieces.
Right. Okay. So I've got a lot of follow-up questions, a lot of clarifying questions. So I don't know how I'm going to pose them. Some So it's gonna look a little confused, but bear with me.
Mm,
Okay. All of this is happening in the context of getting things done, building things in project
yes.
management, correct? So
Yes.
okay. So some Scrum is a take on project management. All right.
Yes.
What is Agile then?
So agile is, in my mind, it's an umbrella term. It's a little bit higher level.
Right.
And the way I like to give a visual to everyone is agile is the umbrella term. It's much more open and abstract. And then
Right.
within agile, you have different denominations. And
Right.
Scrum is one that is within agile, but it also happens to be very popular across the globe.
Right.
So alongside Scrum, you've got Crystal, Kanban, Safe, Less, LESS.
Right.
What's the other one? Six Sigma.
Right.
But agile in and of itself is it's definitely like a mindset. It's
Right.
not it's not a I think it's arguable to say it's a framework.
Mm.
Scrum would be a framework,
Framework.
whereas agile is a mindset.
Okay.
It's a way of how do you think and how do you act and how do you deal with things.
Right. 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 Okay. So in that situation, I guess a follow-up question would be, I'll throw a few words to you. So give me some rapid fire definitions. That's for your understanding, obviously. How would you define? Let me just give you the list first. How will you define a mindset, a principle, a framework, a methodology,
Oh
a
wow.
process? Right. So let's start with the process. How would you define a process?
Process. One, you have an understanding of what is required and needed,
Right.
and then you come up with a plan
Right.
and try to achieve your goal. So the
Right.
process is we're going to do this before we do this, and when
Right.
this happens, we'll do this. So it's like steps.
Very well defined, like, and very well
Yeah, yeah.
predictable,
Process
right?
would be yes.
Yeah. So it's like a black box, right? You have something input in, output out, and the kind of output you want.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that's processing. Let's take, and of course, I am just implying that this is the hierarchy. You can please disagree with me if you want to. So above process, we've got a method/methodology. How will you
Mm.
define a methodology as opposed to a framework or a process?
Oh, this is. Oh, I was not prepared for this, but I love this challenge. Oh my gosh, I know if I were to look up actual definitions, I'm probably gonna be off
No, no.
on these definitions, but no, this will just be like a perspective, my
Yeah,
opinion.
perspective in a relative sense as well. Like, it's not dictionary definition. So like, when you say Scrum is a framework, why is it not a method? Like, what's your understanding of that?
So methodology versus process in my mind, a process is gonna be really refined, like a pinpoint. We
Mm,
do this when we have an error in our software.
mm,
Do. We go to this level, we go to that level, we go to that level, we escalate. Boom.
right,
That to me is kind of a process.
right,
In contrast to methodology is a bit zoomed out. It's
right.
more of a very general, like if we want to build something in just a general way, we want to
Right.
have somewhere along the line where we meet consecutively and we talk about issues, we talk about
Mm,
problems, how can we do better. That's
mm,
one element of the methodology, and then
mm.
another piece of the methodology, and so it's really more of a zoomed out,
Zoomed out.
I guess, made up of many processes.
Right.
That's how I see it in my head.
No,
Now,
I
is
think
that
that makes sense. That makes sense. Right. So it's zoomed out. And then a framework perhaps is just further zoomed out. So it's just the level of, I guess, the level of nitty-gritty management just goes away when it comes to the framework. And I guess the principle or a mindset is just really open. I don't know. It's not specific, but it's kind of pointing you in a particular direction. I compare it with like a fist versus like an open palm. So this
hmm,
is like a principle, and this, no, yeah, this is a principle, and this is a process, and everything else is in between. What do you think of this?
nice? I've never really thought of it that way, to be honest.
Mm,
I can say I've heard people use the word framework and then
mm,
methodology, and they'll
interchangeable.
replace them in the same type of sentence.
Right.
Now, after this podcast, I am going to look up these definitions because I want to see what what like professionalism, what they say. What
Yeah,
does
yeah.
Webster's, what does Scrum say? Scrum.org say?
I suspect there is no consensus there. That's what I
It, I,
think.
Possibly, yeah, very,
Yeah,
very possible. Because like when you
yeah.
start talking about agile, you'll hear the word methodology thrown around a lot. like a lot.
Mm.
And to me, when I hear that word, I immediately think like a zoomed out version of like just visuals, like, oh, you know, you got the Scrum, the repetitiveness, and you've got it in comparison always to something
Yes.
like traditional project management per se, which is
Yes.
very hierarchical. It's like just do like steps. Whereas
Mm.
methodology to me is a bit more of like swirlies in my head, and so
Mm.
I'm just a very visual person. But I don't know if I can really truly answer kind of this question for you.
No worries, no worries. I mean, I brought it up because, again, this is open to contention. Practitioners have a different take, and all the different sort of organizations that compile a body of knowledge, like PMI, they ask people
Yes.
like you and me, and
Yes.
then they have some kind of a consensus building, some kind of a voting mechanism, and then they come out with whatever, you know, the
Yeah.
practitioners. It's important to understand that these body of knowledge, whatever PMBOK and all these guides, they are not really prescriptive. I think they're descriptive. You can initially, when you get starting out, you can use it as a prescription, but ultimately the creativity and the calls that you take while you're being a practitioner is what adds to the body of knowledge. What do you think of that?
I really like what you said about prescriptive and descriptive.
Mm.
That is a huge thing in Scrum. We don't
Mm.
want to prescribe, we want
Mm.
to describe. So, what does that mean to your audience? Prescribing is saying it will be this way in this
Mm.
situation at all times.
Mm.
That doesn't come in handy in Scrum. Scrum wants to have wiggle room. Agile definitely wants to have wiggle room, hence the word agile. You're nimble, you can move, you're flexible. So,
Mm.
for example, if I were to say, oh, all teams at
Mm.
this company
Mm.
will do exactly this way when they're dealing with work. Well, that's a bit silly because every
Mm.
team is a little different. Every team is a little different culture. Maybe
Mm.
what they're building is a little bit different. So the
Mm.
nature of the work is different. Therefore, the people have to think and act differently. So if we were to say Scrum is very prescriptive, you must always do this, and then I hand it off to company A and
Mm.
company B, well, company A may be successful, but company B won't. Example, Spotify and I don't know, Visa.
Mm.
So Visa, one of those companies I used to work for, one of
Mm.
those I did not work for. So the way Spotify deals with their projects versus
Mm.
Visa is going to
Mm.
be different. The
Mm.
nature of the product is different. So they have to act and think differently, but there will be some similarities. That's going to happen. So if I
Right.
were to come in and make Scrum and say you have to do this the same way for everything, well
Right.
then Spotify may look at it and be like, this doesn't work for us, or it does work for us, and Visa may say this works for us, or it doesn't work for us. So
Mm-hmm.
to go back to what you were saying about descriptive and prescriptive, so they want to describe, we would like it, or if we encourage this type of mindset or
Mm.
thinking, and they don't want to say you must do exactly this in this order. That is a bit more waterfall.
Right.
Whereas Scrum and Agile, they leave things open
Mm.
to interpret, no, kind of not, I wouldn't say it to interpretation, but open to how you want to solve that problem.
Right. 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 Okay. Okay. So then this is the next question. This seems like an amazing way to work. It seems very progressive. It seems enlightened. Why must every project not use Scrum or Agile?
What was the question? Why must every project not use Scrum?
Not use it. Yeah.
Okay, no, so this is great. To give a little context to my background, for one of my companies I worked for,
Mm.
let me just zoom out even more. I've worked for four very, very big, important companies out there, and I've been on very different projects, all software based. And
Right.
one of them, and I came to learn, it really wasn't in need of Scrum per se,
Right.
because the nature of the project, it was a huge initiative. Really not a project, it was an initiative. It was like a 2-3 year type thing. They were building software that already existed. Another company built it, and
Mm.
that company that built it gave my company a template on
Right.
how to go about it. So
Right.
they had the instructions per se. They knew what was needed. They had already used the product. So quote
Right.
unquote, they've touched the software.
Right.
They've dealt with it. Whereas that's one. The
Right.
other is in software, when you're building, a lot of times it's unknown. You're in a chaotic frontier level. You don't know what to expect. So you have to think and
Mm.
act differently between
Mm.
predictable versus unpredictable.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So going down is Scrum really always kind of needed per se? I would say no, absolutely not.
No. No.
I would say ask yourself, what's the nature of the project? Are we
Right.
building something that's predictable? Example, a house. We've built
Right.
houses all the time. We've built houses for many, many years. We know the foundation goes first, then you get a frame, then the plumbing, electrical comes in. You don't put the windows up first. There's certain things you don't do before the other one. You just physically can't really do that. So physics is definitely a factor here compared to software. So if we're building something that's predictable and we know what's involved, you don't have to really implement Scrum unless building it like a new like space house that's a floating house or something wild that's
Yeah.
never been done before. Okay, Scrum would be very, very applicable
Right.
because we need to meet, we make sure we're doing everything properly. Now I'll
Right.
stop there and say you can take elements of Scrum and implement it in something predictable. That's just fine.
Right.
So if you're building a house, let's say you're building a really big house. My parents, for example, back in the 80s, my dad had the blueprints to the house and he was involved with the blueprinting. That's
Right.
part of his job. He's actually good at that stuff. And they were building it and didn't realize that they needed to have 2 stories, and the second story was not right. So it was
Right.
just kind of reused for an attic instead of a second floor.
Right.
And he didn't realize it until it was too late.
Oh.
So you could say, why? Well, okay, if you had taken him, the stakeholder, and put him in that process, the building process, and have little check-ins throughout the building of the house, he could have probably foreseen, whoa, 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 this needs to be 10 feet higher. What's up? What's up?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
So it's arguable you can take elements of Scrum and put it in a very predictable type project.
Right.
But would it be full? Do you need it? We can argue that point all day.
Okay. Okay. So I guess I'll just try and regurgitate whatever you said because I,
Sure,
I
sure.
also want to understand it. So one is if it's predictable or if it's unpredictable. And I'll also
Yep.
say unpredictable could be experimental as well. So if you're engaged in some kind of an experiment, you don't know what's going to happen,
Yes.
um, which means it's not predictable. So
Yes.
then Scrum might not be a good candidate for that. The second thing is like just the limits of physics. Like for example, the example that you said, like if your dad, I'm assuming your dad was called in when the house was kind of finished, maybe not like the aesthetics of it, but the structure was finished, right? Right.
Maybe.
So yeah, but even if he was called at that stage as like a sign off, it's not going to help. So in that scenario where the physics is a limiting factor, perhaps some new phases would have to be introduced if the technology allows. So blueprint stage to like a 3D rendering, perhaps like a 3D printing, then you'd understand like the person can sign off. However, once the construction starts, then you got to stop the changes. I mean, would that be correct? That's another axis,
Yeah,
physics.
yeah. Yeah, the physics could very much hold things back, and so that goes back to the whole nature of the project, where
Right,
you've got physical, you can tangible type project, and
right,
software. It's really not tangible.
right,
It's very unknown, and so we want to try and make things known and predictable.
right, right,
So I would say the more predictable something is, and especially I would say, I guess you can maybe even argue if it's tangible, the type of thing you're
mm,
building.
mm.
Maybe you could pivot away from Scrum, but I wouldn't say Agile. I would say Scrum
Okay,
because
okay,
in the manufacturing business, you have Lean Six Sigma,
right,
right? You got
right,
Toyota,
right,
who pioneered certain types of I'm going to get this wrong, but pioneered ways to build better and more efficiently. And then Lean Six Sigma is also a big part of that, and it's used heavily in manufacturing, so that's tangible. So
right.
yeah, so agile would apply there, but not so much Scrum per
Scrum
se.
was not going to apply there. Okay, got it. Let me take a slightly awkward segue and just talk about, since you mentioned lean, right? And I just like, so Toyota came to my mind. You mentioned that as well. But what else came to my mind was the JIT, just-in-time production system, and then the
Mhm.
issue with the PPE when COVID hit, right?
Yeah.
So, like again, lean is not a one size fits all. So if you have strategic assets, or if you need, I don't know, some granaries, you need it for national security or just social stability, you don't want to apply lean to that. So I guess the intention of your project also matters, right?
Intention, yes, yes, very
Yes.
much so. Yeah.
Yes.
Now
Okay.
I can't speak deeply on lean. I'm not a lean
Yeah.
expert.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
only, yeah, I've only seen it, heard of it, met people, but so I'm not going to go too deep on lean because
That's
I'm
fine.
not
That's
the
fine.
expert.
That was the awkward tangent. But I was that was just another way to say that if you are trying to build a space house, the intention is an experimental and a trial, right? To build a house in space. So there, I guess you can afford um, basically using Scrum. So the intention is there. I guess what about the capacity for risk taking and experimentation as well, which means like the capital you have available to deploy. Does that affect changes? Does that affect decision making? If you want to take the traditional route versus the Scrum route, how much money you have to throw at the project?
Mm, that's an interesting question. Let's see, how can I relate this? So
Mm,
I've worked in a setting where I've lost resources, and I really don't like saying resources when I'm talking about people, so I'm going to say humans, human beings. So I lost out of a team of say 20, 25 people. I've lost about 5 to 6, I think 7 people, so developers and QAs in this case,
right.
and that very much changed our ability to output. Now, it didn't necessarily change Scrum to, should we go from Scrum to traditional?
Right.
We just do the same thing, but in a little bit smaller capacity.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm answering your question appropriately here, but I would say assets or budget in this case, I don't think really does affect should we choose this over that.
Mm,
I think it's more of what are we building
mm,
and is it predictable? Is it unknown? Is it
mm,
predictable or is it unknown?
mm,
And how much do we know about it?
mm,
And how do we want to go about it? Because if you
mm,
if you absolutely have a deadline like in 12 months, but you may have some wiggle room to kind of throw some money at it. Okay, well maybe you could be a little bit traditional in the sense that you just start piling tons and tons of people on a big team, which one of my companies I worked for did that
mm,
because they could afford it. And then
mm,
another company I worked on, they didn't have that level of money,
mm.
so they want to squeeze out as much they can from their team. So I really don't know. I would want to hear what someone else has to say about this question as well. Does it really impact? Should we choose agile? Should we choose traditional project management when related to budgets or capacity?
I'll give you an example, right? So let's say a client comes in and you are a vendor, right? So it's a vendor kind of situation when you're making a tech, well, you're consulting them, so you're making a product for them, white glove service, right? It's an experimental product, which means you don't know for sure if it's going to become something it has, right? So it's not like making like a Ford Model T, which has been done for 100 years or whatever. It's making something new, but the client does not understand this, right? So the client's focus on the contract is like, okay, so this is the scope and this is the money and this is what you're doing, right? So that traditional triangle. But the project is experimental, right? Both of us know that there is a chance that whatever you are thinking is the output is not going to come in. Why? Because you can't even tell me what you're thinking, right? This is an experiment, and they don't get it, so they don't. And then of course, Scrum is a good sort of a way to use it in this scenario. But what I'm asking is, and I understand if you have not come across this situation, but if you need to convince the client to incorporate Scrum into the contract and work like that, so we need their participation. Just money is not important. We need them to understand that they'll be paying us per sprint and we'll get to a sprint so rather
Mm,
than what the defined scope is, because there is no
mm.
defined scope because it's experimental. Is that something that you or your colleagues have come across ever?
I haven't been at that level. That's probably a level or two above me when it comes to money. I've never been one to touch the finances or the budget side of things. Um, Helped in a way, yes, but responsible for no. So I probably won't be the best person to ask. However, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I would think if we have money, a set amount of and we have scope, and that's
Hmm.
presented to me and my client,
Hmm.
I would, and knowing the nature a little bit of what we're trying to do, I
Hmm.
would most likely want to push for Scrum or some type of agile process.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I would want to push for that, because
Hmm.
that mostly Scrum in this case, because I know that we are to take our stakeholders and bring them in early and get consistent feedback. So
Hmm.
that also gives a sense of security that, hey, like, this is what we're building. Is it what you want? Okay, off we go. 2 weeks, we come back. Hey, this is what we've built. This is what you asked us. Are we good? We're good.
Hmm.
Use
Hmm.
it, demo it, play with it if
Hmm.
possible, and keep going. I would feel safer in that scenario to
Hmm.
implement Scrum.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's just
Okay.
my 2 cents.
Okay. So let's stick with mindset for a minute now. Uh, Agile, you said, it's nimble, it's responsive, it can respond to situations. The flip
Mm.
side to the coin would be a negative spin on it, right? So agile could mean indecisive, flaky, doesn't have a plan. Too responsive, which means doesn't have any grit. Have you come across this kind of a criticism on a theoretical level or on an academic level about the agile way of working?
I have come across where someone abuses Agile,
Okay.
and it was well, I don't know if I should say this. It was a person in charge of a product,
Mm,
and this person wanted to constantly change requirements. And
mm,
I had to say, listen, like, the whole point of us being in Scrum is you give us a you give us a backlog. We're going to take a piece of it. We're going to go over that, and we're going to refine it and make sure it's all crisp and clean and
mm,
shiny. And we
mm,
get checks off before we take it, and we're good. And we're going to run with it for 2 weeks, in our case, 2 weeks, and do our best to provide something at the end of those 2 weeks to you.
mm, mm,
But their mindset was, well, I can come in and I can ask for changes at any point in time I want, and you have to do that for me. You have to
right,
stop and you have to do that for me. And I
right.
said, eh,
No.
not that's and I literally said this. That's abusing the system,
Mm,
because we want to reduce disturbance in Scrum. We want to reduce disturbances on the
mm,
team so they can
mm,
give it to you. So
mm,
I had to coach this person that, but you have, if you want something, we can negotiate,
mm,
but you can't keep coming in and asking the team to stop and do this, stop and do this. Then you get work that's not done. It sits on the shelf and it gets what I call digital dust. And
mm,
we're never really ever delivering something to you. It's always
mm,
just sitting on the shelf. You don't want to have half a car for Toyota sitting on the shelf and then go back and then go back. And this person just thinks they can do that. So I would say I've had an experience a few times where someone thinks agile means I get to do whatever I want, whenever I want. And that is not true.
mm, mm. Okay. So I guess to summarize, if you're basically starting a project and if you have the luxury to choose between Scrum and Agile, you want to first of all not follow the trends. Figure out if it's really needed, right? And how do you figure that out? If how predictable is the result, is the project, right? So how the level of predictability would be one input. The other input would be, wait, I mean, if it's experimental or not. Second thing is probably how much cash you have to throw for experimentation. I mean, does it need to be an experimental project if it can be a predictable thing? I mean, do you need to design a new way to, new way to build a house versus just get more projects? As a business decision, you need to figure that out. I guess would that make sense for you? Like, I'll give an example. Let's say
Yeah,
there's a
yeah, please.
developer. Let's say
Uh-huh.
there's a developer, and they're trying to and assume that no technology exists to build houses on desert, right? The Arabian desert or the Thar in India, right?
Yep.
Um, right. So they need to in order to basically create value and extract some value and remain in business, they need to figure out should we invest in that technology and then essentially propose to a government that they're going to build a township over there, or should they just choose the traditional route of competing in big cities and building some condo project here or there? I guess what was the business intention can also be the reason to choose what kind of project method you want to choose. What do you think?
The business decision matters very much.
Intention. Okay. Hmm.
Yeah, intention does matter. Because if you don't have intention, then there's going to be confusion and chaos.
Right.
You don't want confusion and chaos. And Scrum, if implemented in this scenario, would start sniffing that out. You would start being able to pinpoint, hey, this person or these people actually don't know what they want us to build. And that's I've experienced that on some of my Scrum teams where they mean very well. The I'll say product owners or stakeholders, they mean very well and they want things, but then you start like, wait a minute, like you gave us instructions and we're trying to build it. Now we're confused. And then we go back to them and we're like, hey, you asked us for this and this. This doesn't seem to work out. And you want to get their feedback. And then they're kind of like, I have to figure that out. Because they didn't really know in the beginning. They were just like emotionally like, just build it, just go, run with it, run with that.
Yes.
And Scrum doesn't want that. We try to prevent that.
So that's what I'm saying. So in the situations, business intention, that was my third point in the summary, but I guess now you've just added one more point. The client behavior, right? Scrum requires client collaboration at least
Absolutely.
once in 2 weeks or a month, right? So if that is not available, if the client is like, man, do your thing, I don't know, right? I don't want to give you inputs, just do it, right? Then you need to either figure out a client rep or Scrum. You can't do Scrum. You need to do something else. You need to figure it out. Change the process a little bit. What are you going to do, right? You want the money. You took the money. You signed the contract. And the client is like, I don't know. So that becomes a problem. Like, can we follow Scrum properly? Should the Scrum Master even guide the team towards properly following Scrum, or carve out an exception or something like that?
I would say if the Scrum Master if the Scrum team were to discover these gaps, gaps with the requirements or instructions for those that are not familiar with the word. The Scrum Master has a duty to go to the right person or people and say, this is an issue. We have found gaps. How can I help you? We need to solve that, because if you are giving us instructions that are unclear or there's gaps, as we start working down the line and rebuilding, we may be stacking our issues. We may be making our problems more complex, problems that are unknown right now, because what you gave us was unclear. So hence, going back to the iterative process, we want to keep bringing in the stakeholders, and it's okay if they don't know, because that's life. But the point of us doing Scrum and in this business agreement, this handshake agreement, is we will also be providing you opportunities to find gaps in what you're asking us. And those folks may not know it up front until it happens. And I would assume they would be happy that we found a problem now instead of shipping it later and then things crashing and burning once it's out in the wild, or once we've delivered it, I mean.
I think you are underestimating the capacity of people who want to just offload and just, what's the word? I'm forgetting the word now. This is so embarrassing. What's the word? Like outsource, right? Outsource some of their troubles. I think you're underestimating their capacity to basically get really annoyed when asked to participate in the formation of whatever they want to do. That's what I'm saying. In my previous example, right? So if we're talking about formation of the contract, the point of Scrum and Agile, or the kind of projects, is the requirements they just can't. Physically, we cannot have all the requirements ready in the planning stage.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
there is no planning. Requirements evolve. That's why we need the client. Otherwise, we can't just intuit what the client wants. And if they don't understand this, then we need to figure out some other way to work.
Right. And I don't have it up in front of me, but for those listening, Agile does have certain principles. I'm getting it wrong, I'm sure, values, principles. But one of them is collaboration over documentation.
Documentation, right.
So we would much rather have a collaborative process. And instead of you giving us a bunch of documents and we pour over it, or someone that's not even related to the team in any form or fashion, that doesn't really understand the team or the capabilities at all, in this room making these big decisions and then handing it down the line to a team that was never involved in the first place.
Right.
in an ideal world,
Hmm.
there would be a very good connection between that business person that makes the decisions that hands it off to the team or teams
Right.
to build
Right.
something. And so agile is going to be a very zoomed out version of we would just like collaboration over documentation, but that
Hmm.
does not mean documentation shouldn't happen.
Yes. Yes. Understood, man. Okay, let's do a quick definitional segment. Just because I want to go deep into Scrum specifically, but then I also have tendencies of being a completist, and in my mind, I'm assuming my audience is like that as well. So they're like, well, what about this and what about that? So let's just touch those things, right?
Yeah.
Assuage
Okay.
those anxieties. All right. What is a project? Very, at very basic level. That's why we are using Scrum Agile. That's the reason the discussion starts. So, what is a project according to you?
Ooh, a project according to me. We have something that we want to build, and we need to have a process or a plan in place to build it. And a
Okay.
project will require, in some form or fashion, resources, whether that's tools or people, some form of assets. But a project is a very general. I'm not using a definition. You want to build something, you want to deliver something,
Hmm.
and you need to figure out how to do it,
Hmm.
um, and possibly sprinkle in some deadlines.
Okay. In this context, I mean, projects can be used in a lot of context. I am a practitioner of GTD. Projects, the definition of projects is wide over there. But either way, in this context, you mostly require multiple people to work on projects, right? So there's that dynamic as well. People
Hmm.
management. Okay.
Yeah, yes, that aspect's big. I'm sure there's projects where one person could do something for you, but
Right.
I've never been in that situation. It's always been team level.
Team level. Okay. Then I guess the next definitional question is, what is project management? And I suppose in a deeper way, why do projects need to be managed?
What is project management and why do projects need to be managed? Okay. This is just going off of, I'm just kind of riffing here. I don't
Yeah,
have the
yeah, yeah.
definition.
This is riffing. It's a podcast. It's riff central.
Okay, project management. Okay, let me digest this and bring up some relative examples.
Mm,
Okay, project management is looking at what needs to be done,
mm,
who wants it, why, know the why,
mm,
what's the ask, who's involved. So you need to know the people and all that. What's the capacity? Do you have timelines? Understand the timelines. Come to some agreements. When can we deliver? Can we deliver in pieces? Are we allowed to deliver way later? So
mm,
time's involved. You got to know time. You got to know the people involved. You need to know the scope. You need to know
mm,
the budget.
mm.
Um, and you have to work as best as you can to get all of those in sync together to output and provide value and hopefully maybe even save money and resources. And so
Mm.
all of that process is like a blanket over that would be the project management. So you're helping kind of massage it along the way. You need
Right,
someone to help manage that because the
right,
people doing the work, they'll be way too focused on
right,
the nitty gritty. They're not going
right,
to be most likely being able to have those peripheral vision where a project manager has to have peripheral vision and foresee things and
right.
plan for that stuff.
Okay. So here, this is good. So so in a project team, then it's also important to understand that this team, this outfit which is formed, it's going to dissolve after the project is over. Now they can reform and perhaps work on some kind of
Yeah.
operational iteration kind of project, or not project operation, not a project because project ends. But so that's another aspect to understand that this is not going to be like a forever kind of deal. So that
It
introduces
will
some
come
new
to an end.
social, yeah, it will come to an end. Okay, so new social dynamics sort of come in, right? And I'm speaking very broadly, and this example has like some elements of corruption over here. But you
Okay.
see a few folks who are like working and they get like a daily wage, and then this is also used as a way to sort of sabotage the project because they want more money. So you just delay
Oh,
it You
Okay.
delay it because you're getting paid on a daily level. So then I guess if that is happening, if a project manager in some part of the world is encountering this situation, and these are typically going to be parts of the world that are frontiers when it comes to like modern civilization, right? Of course, traditional, but like modern ways of doing
Mhm.
things and equality and all of those things. Yeah, they'll have their own system, but this is a new way. So the project manager needs to then figure out how do you change the incentive structure of paying people because this is being abused. I guess so that is also going to be important. What do you think?
Oh, wow. No, that's a really good topic.
Hmm.
So people are deliberately muddying the waters to extend the time. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's, I have, I have come across a few team members that I think may have done that at one point in time.
Hmm.
And that will show up that if
Hmm.
when the more you understand your team and how they operate, you are able to sniff that out pretty
Hmm.
quickly.
Hmm.
Scrum could help you do that because you want to get close to your team and you want to understand them and
Hmm.
not in a manipulative way, but
Hmm.
to help them.
Hmm.
So let's see. How do I want to answer this question of yours? Okay, just refresh my mind one more time. Refresh my mind one more time. What?
This was more like a proposition, and again more like a dialogue because I didn't mean it as a question really, but let's see. Let me try to reform it as well. Okay, so as a project manager, you figure out that you have a certain structure, certain I don't know structure of paying people, right? Paying
Okay.
people, folks on your team. Let's say in this example, builders who are coming and building the building, right? A lot of
Okay.
building here. Okay,
Okay.
you figure out that there are incessant delays happening. You really understood what the reason is, but now what occurs to you is that hey, maybe there is some sabotage, maybe there is some organized activity which is they are slowing down the work just so that they can get more money, right? Now they might have their reasons for striking, organized, whatever.
Hmm.
This is a situation where suddenly it's just for a person who was just managing a regular project is beyond their pay scale. This project manager needs to put on his fixer hat now and start doing some politicking. So I guess my
Mm,
question is, how important is being having some political savvy and going outside the boundaries? Like how important is it for a project manager, or I guess in the concept of
mm.
Scrum there is no project manager but like a Scrum Master? What do you think happens in those scenarios?
Okay. So let me think on this because I have, let me give this example.
Hmm.
I was once asked by one of my supervisors how to help our team's morale. Um, the team's morale was going down, and that meant productivity was affected. Quality of work was affected too.
Hmm.
I know in software development that often the case, we don't really get to always work with the end users and really like develop a wonderful relationship, a close relationship with them, and see how they're using the software day to day. So for
Hmm.
in my line of context, we build software for people all around the world that use it, and different warehouses all over the place, and certain warehouse managers will use certain types of software. We don't have the capacity or ability always to take our team, who's distributed around the globe, to physically go to these warehouses and stand next to these warehouse managers and walk with
Hmm.
them day to day
Hmm.
or hour by hour to see how does the software that I built for you get used. Now, if you could bridge that gap, if you can bring the end user closer to your team, you can do a lot of intrinsic value. And
Hmm.
that is, you may empower your team, you may give them this sense of value, like, wow, I built that for you. I
Hmm.
see how my work is being used here. This is great.
Right.
You and that can also sniff out where there were gaps in the requirements along, and that went all the way down the production line.
Hmm.
It does a lot of wonderful things.
Hmm.
Now, that's costly. That
Hmm.
is not cheap to do.
Okay.
Mostly, that's not easy to do.
Okay.
So, if I were to see something on my team where I see people delaying, I see people possibly sabotaging, and in the Scrum Master mindset, I would want to have a very, very deep conversation with those people and ask them, tell me, what's going on here? I'm seeing ABC, explain it to me. So you have like a therapist hat, you put that on, and you're also an investigator, you put that hat on. And you need to understand the why. Why is this happening? And if the person is just flat out has given up, I would recommend you may want to just, release them. You need to let them go. But if it's more of a, they answer you and you're like, well, like I just, their morale is down, and they they're not malicious in this case. They're just they're just losing the energy. There are ways you can bring that up as a Scrum Master in this case. But in terms of being malicious, I you probably need to get someone like HR involved. That's a problem. And if there's multiple people doing this and it's not just one, yeah, I mean, you have a large portion and it's consecutive. To me, that spells a deeper cultural problem in that company, in that project, or with a client. I don't know. That tells me something deep. There's a deep problem that needs to be looked at.
I'll be controversial and say it could also be a deeper cultural problem in a particular community, a region, political entity, or a country in that aspect. It's just that maybe this is, like, for example, at least till the domination of the Western culture, punctuality is really seen as like a Western thing, right? A lot of other cultures don't see time in a very exact way. So if you are
Yes.
working, yeah, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
I like to think I'm very punctual. I like this, and I understand both perspectives, but it's just about respecting the other person, right? So if you value the individual in a particular culture, you will value their time, hence you will value punctuality. Now, if you're
Yes.
suddenly working in a culture where punctuality is not valued, that's a can of worms that you did not even think was a problem, and you need to now solve for that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So with globalism, we have a lot of this now. And a lot of
Mm,
all of my teams I've ever worked on and all these for these big companies, the
mm,
teams have been made up from people all across the globe.
mm,
And that means culture, and culture means ways of thinking and acting and doing and getting people that are from different cultures, especially business cultures, can be very challenging. It can
yeah,
burn you out.
yeah.
So, what you said a second ago about time, you're very very correct. There are some cultures, and there's an actual word for this in linguistics, where time to someone isn't exact. I
Mm,
grew up in a society that you say 10 a.m. It is 10 a.m. The meeting is at 10, not 10:20, not 10:30. You don't stroll in and be like, yeah, I had a conversation with my grandpa on the way here. And they're like, oh, that's cool, man. No,
mm,
doesn't happen here.
mm,
Now there are other cultures that I've met that are like, yeah, I mean, that's just normal for us. Like, yeah, we may be 10, 15 minutes late. They're more
yeah,
lackadaisical.
yeah,
So you just have to do a lot, and specifically my role, Scrum Master, you'd have to do a lot of coaching. And if that person doesn't change, then I would say escalate it to their manager if you can.
yeah.
And then you have to ask, why are you hiring these people who don't respect, your project? Like, why? Like, I've seen that. I've seen a company completely gut team members, that high performing team members, to replace them with cheaper labor, and the labor ended up being like not on the level of what we needed them to be.
Yeah.
And so you got a problem with the company at this point in time, and the folks up in the C-suite making these decisions
Mm,
and endorsing this company to hire these people, and with the mindset of like the deadline stay. Well, how can you have this deadline stay if you're getting rid of the people that build you the product?
yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
like there's a disconnect. And
Yeah.
now going back to how important is it to be like politically savvy? I I would say if you're making big decisions, well, yeah, you need to be politically savvy. If you're in my role where you're very granular,
Mm.
it would be nice, but I don't, I don't know if I've ever had to really be politically savvy for my Scrum Master role, but I've had to be culturally aware. Every day I have to be culturally aware.
Right. Right.
Hands down. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. How important would be for a Scrum Master to sort of invest in knowing the latest, not like a specialist, but just like an informed layman. Um, specialist things going on in psychology, sociology, anthropology,
Mm.
because ultimately they're people, cultures. It's just
Oh,
you're trying
yeah.
to become better. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you said this. I don't know if you know my background, but I majored in applied linguistics. And so
Oh.
applied linguistics is this, I'll tie this together. Applied linguistics, we also talk about how we think, how we learn, and
Hmm.
with natural language.
Hmm.
And so coming from that background, I learned a lot of how humans communicate, even across different languages and cultures intertwined and all these elements.
Hmm.
So that background has helped me significantly as a Scrum Master.
Hmm.
So because I know, okay, maybe this person's speech who may have a difficult time speaking in English versus this person over here whose native language is not English, but a completely different language. So you've got these two huge linguistic gaps coming together on this
Hmm.
team, and confusion happens a lot.
Hmm.
And so if you are not aware, in Scrum Master sense, if you're not aware of how humans communicate, how they think, how they deal with each other, how does that person's culture deal with business, how does that person's culture deal with authority
Hmm.
or lack of authority,
Hmm.
it would be detrimental to the Scrum Master if you don't know those things. So it's I really like this topic because the more I think about it, going down Scrum, going down the certifications and the classes I've taken, the formal training, you don't really ever hear more on the psychological aspect of things. It's just you want to empower, you want to do this, but
Hmm.
the
How?
getting yeah, and the how is very difficult, and so that's where the human element gets involved, and it's really fascinating to talk about.
Hmm.
But I would say a Scrum Master they would be doing themselves a disservice if they don't do some type of reading or learning something about communication, how to deal with people, how to deal with difficult situations.
Hmm.
They would do themselves a disservice. So to answer your
Hmm.
question, yes, I think it's very important that a Scrum Master be up to speed on a little bit of psychology
Hmm.
in general.
I
Yeah.
I'd also add to this advice that don't be Machiavellian, but please read what Machiavellians do. Because if you need to respond in a Machiavellian way, that's fine, but don't be that. So it's just because you don't know evil things exist doesn't mean they don't exist, right? So just you keep yourself like abreast with all of these things. Okay. Um, can you quickly give me a definitional difference between agile project management and your traditional or waterfall or command and control project management? How do you see it?
The way I see it is with an agile project management. The agile itself has this manifesto, and they have certain ways of thinking that they encourage, but that doesn't mean they only have to do it that way. Going back to the collaboration, is we see more value out of that than
Hmm.
technical documentation. But yeah, you need technical documentation by all means.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas traditional is going to be more of there's someone in charge, that person has people below them,
Hmm.
and you do exactly what they say, and it just goes from here to the next step to the next step to the next step, and it's hence the waterfall, so that
Hmm.
directions come from the top, they go to another person, that person disseminates it. Maybe they need to break down that work into two different people, those people have people underneath them, and so that's where that visual comes from. Traditional is, I feel like, much more applied to the predictable, like construction, um, or it's very authoritative,
Hmm.
and it does have its advantages. And I'm
Hmm.
going to use an example in a second. And agile is a little bit more flexible, hence the word agile. We don't want to be prescriptive. We want to be a little bit more descriptive, a little more open, and allow for people to bring building the product to have their voices moved up the line and shared. Agile would, if you were thinking of a visual, it's more of a circle. It's more of
Hmm.
everyone's kind of equal. So
Hmm.
authority does kind of dissolve in an agile type mindset. Um, in a traditional sense, you do have someone that is in charge, is responsible, and you do have to listen to them. Example, you have doctors, you have medicine. You don't want a patient coming in with the ER who has a severed arm to be in a group of nurses and doctors and like, okay, do you want to take this? Do you have the skills? Okay, I think I can do this. I could use some help. No, 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 you don't want that. You don't want people to kind of sit down like that. No, you need people to act, move, quick, go. They have the hard skills. You know they have the hard skills to do it. And they have a very set process. This bleeding requires this type of bandage, requires this type of pressure, requires this type of time, requires this type of angle or position, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Traditional works very well in that way. That's not really how it works in software. And Agile and Scrum can be used outside of software for those listening, but that's my expertise. Like military or law enforcement, traditional works really well. Like we have project here. We need to do something with the community. I'm going to have this person in charge. That person's the contact, our POC, and that person has subordinates. And those people are doing the work. You have a problem with them, you take it to me. So it's very top down, top down, top down. And that works well because you don't want to come into that and ask someone for assistance or raise a problem, and then they're like, well, I don't know, do you want to do it? Do you want to do it? Me as a person in the community, I would feel like, okay, y'all don't know what you're doing. That's a problem. Why are my taxes going to you? You don't know what you're doing. You want that sense of hard skill and confidence, and you know that it's going to follow a very specific process. Whereas Agile, it's going to be open. I keep saying this word open. It's flexible to changes, and I feel like there's more human element involved with Agile. You really want to empower your team members and treat them as humans and not so much as a resource per se. I'm more of an Agile Scrum fanboy, so I kind of like to argue with traditional management. And so I will always kind of look at traditional management, project management, as a little bit more cold, a little bit more like you're not really looked at as a human. You're just like a thing. Whereas in Agile, I feel a little bit more valued as a human. So that's a little bit more of the emotional side of things. Maybe not what you were looking for, but I'm getting this urge to go to the Agile Manifesto and start reading it off to you. And because I'm unprepared for this, I should have had this prepared. But if those listening, definitely Google Agile Manifesto and read it, and you'll see what I'm trying to get at because I'm blanking on it. And those principles and values are really, really key to understanding the difference between Agile and traditional project management. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But that's not to say. That's not to say that Agile elements don't exist in traditional project management. Right. You can definitely have a mix. You can have a mix.
Right. It's a continuum. I mean, you have to see what's the level of agility you want. Now, let me ask you something. Is there something about lack of experimentation, or putting it in another way, is there something about predictability that sociologically leads itself to an authoritarian structure? Because predictable projects are traditional waterfall, command and control, which implies they are authoritarian. So is there something about predictability that leads itself to that kind of structure? And is there something about unpredictability that leads itself towards more open environment, more respect, more equality, more whatever? What do you think?
So if humans are involved, we are a species that loves predictability. We don't really like the unknown.
Okay.
It's us naturally as a species coming up with Agile and Scrum to deal with the unknown.
Because so we have pioneers as well.
Yeah, we love to put things in boxes. That's what we do. We do it all the time. So that brings a sense of comfort, and it helps us handle things, and it gives us a little bit of evidence. If I were to take something and categorize it, then I can measure it. So go back to empiricism, then I can base my decisions off of that and move forward. We're not I feel like we're not necessarily a truly chaotic species. We really are process oriented. I know to leave my apartment, I must always go to that door. Go to that door. I don't go off the balcony. I can't do that. I'm going to walk over there, open the door, shut the door, walk. I'm going to do this over and over and over and over and over. I'm not going to be chaotic and crawl out the door. We just don't do that. We just, as a species, we are very predictable. We want predictability. And I think that has a huge impact on how we deal with projects. If you were to go to some type of project where it's very unpredictable, you may start seeing people wanting to take notes, start asking questions and get clarifications so they don't have to repeat themselves. They don't want chaos. They want to take that abstractness and start putting it in boxes and categorizing and labeling and measuring all the time. On a tangent there. So I don't even know if I answered your question, Saagar. I got into the moment in that one.
No, this is good. I do like, I actually have a follow-up here. So in this scenario, how, when it comes to Scrum, and folks, we are using Scrum and Agile interchangeably. I am, at least. It's not interchangeable, but for the most part it is. So pragmatically it is. Now in Scrum, can you give us like a very basic sort of distributional, I guess, geometric definition? So like number of team members, what's the garden variety? How does like a regular Scrum team work?
Okay, so there are definitely use cases out there. Over time, folks wanted to understand that, and this also comes from psychology and whatnot. And something important that I want your audience to know, because I think this is really cool. I'm going to connect these here. 9/11, when that happened, there was a response team, lots of response teams in New York, county, local, state, federal, and each one of them, they all had different ways of using 10 code. So like 10-4, 10-20, 10-3, 10-17. And what one team used for 10 code, maybe the FBI versus the local police department, was a completely different 10 code. So there was chaos. And this is a true story. There's chaos. There was a lot of miscommunication, a lot of inefficiencies in this moment, this very particular moment. So at the time, George Bush was the president, and he came up with a program or a push for, I would like agencies to use plain speech. I don't want you to use special codes. And we'll even give you grants. We'll give you money if you do this. And so that was to kind of level the playing field and kind of reduce inefficiencies and chaos. So the output would be quickly achieved with less efficiencies, less, God forbid, deaths in some situations.
Right.
So you're gonna I'm blanking, and you're gonna have to give me the question.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I just wanted to ask you that what is the Scrum team composed of? So like a typical garden variety Scrum team, what does it look? What kind of people does it have? What are the roles? What do they do?
That's where I was going. Okay, I was 2 steps away from connecting those dots. So why I was telling you about that is because they looked into the team sizes as well, and they found that 8 to 9 people, 9 being max, was the best, most efficient. That's the cutoff of before you become too inefficient as a team. So that was in like a police life-saving type scenario. And then you have where I'm at in my world, software development. There's also been case studies over there, and they came up with similar outputs. 8 to 9 people. We don't want to go above that in a Scrum team, because then it gets way out of hand. So if you can visualize, actually, since we're doing video, I'll just do this. I'm just going to draw this out right here. 1, 2, 3. Give me a second. Okay, so you've got 1 point. This is 1 person. This point represents a person. This point, 2 people, and there's 1 relationship amongst them. You've got 3 people on a team. You have 3 relationships amongst them. Well, how many relationships do you think will exist if I have 4 people in a team?
I feel like I am in a quiz contest. I know there was in BMP, they had formula for it. I've forgotten it, but yeah.
So we've got
Boy.
4 people on a team. You've got 4 relationships plus 2, so you have 6. So we went from 1, 3 to 6, but we have 4 people.
Yeah.
So the more people you, so what those lines represent, it can be relationships, it can be complexities. So once you start getting more people on the team, that complexity starts looking like a crazy, just like star with lots of lines, not necessarily exponential in growth, if I remember the math correctly, but it's a really good, easy peasy thing to have in your pocket to understand why we don't want too many people on a team, because we can step over each other. So ideally in Scrum, for every 8 to 9 people, you want a Scrum Master.
For
And
every
then,
8 to 9 people, you want a Scrum Master. Okay.
and then you go over that 9, then you need to either break down those teams to 5 and 5, and have 2 Scrum Masters, or that 1 Scrum Master, if they're good enough, they can handle the 5 and the 5.
Right.
But you get too many people on one thing, you can get out of hand real quick.
Right.
I've been in that situation 30 to 40% of my time as a Scrum Master, and I've had to have conversations with supervisors or upper management and beg them to not make my team so huge. And I've never been successful, unfortunately. They listen to me and they're like, we get it, but that's not the direction we're going. You're going to have 25 people. And so I have to adapt to that. And I have to coach my team like, hey, I know we're huge. I know we went from 8 people to 25 people. And now you've got this sense of like, well, my voice isn't heard much anymore because I used to have more time with you, and now I don't have as much time. So then you get into this emotional and moral and ethical aspects of it. Can someone handle a big team? Probably, but case studies have shown we really don't want to go over 8 to 9 people. We really don't. Even in like traditional project management, like going back to the whole 9/11 thing, you really don't want that many people. And if you do, you need someone to help manage or govern them, and then you have another person to help manage the overflow, and you just keep going down, and that looks like a triangle. It's like a hierarchy. So to answer your question, 8 to 9 is, I would say, the magic number.
The magic number for the maximum number of people. I have to ask you, like in the previous question, is there something about predictability that leads itself to authoritarian social structures, which could just be like, the organization of a project team. It doesn't have to be North Korea. But there is also something about more numbers, just plain numbers, that leads itself to some kind of an authoritarian organizing metric. Even if it's democratic, even if you elect your representative, they vote as per their conscience. They don't have to check with you every time. It's not a referendum. So I think if you go above 8 or 9, if you go above 20, there probably is some kind of a sociological need for having some kind of a middle management. Some structure starts evolving. It just happens. So that's also and Scrum doesn't want that. Scrum doesn't want hierarchy. So that's one big reason why you don't want to have more than 9 people.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm so glad you brought that up. So I've been on a team, multiple teams, where we went from a really Scrum healthy team, and we blew up because the company wanted to do that. And out of that, I've watched people who have leadership skills start to shine, and they'll pop up. And so if you were to take the team and you cut it into thirds, you've got maybe like your devs, your QAs, and and then your business side, your functional side. And let's just say that's what the flavor of the pie looks like. You got 3 in there. You start getting 10 devs and maybe like 10 QAs. You start to see maybe a dev manager bloop come into play, and then or a dev lead come into play, and then a QA lead come into play. And they'll just naturally, like, it's so neat watching humans start to kind of form these little cultural subgroups amongst themselves, and taking guidance from this person that has maybe more experience, because we as a species, we love order and putting into boxes and predictability. So it does happen.
Okay. All right. So moving on here. So we've got 3 Scrum roles, right? Scrum Master, Product Owner, and developers. Developer here essentially means anybody and everybody who's not a Scrum Master or the Product Owner, which was interesting when I first heard that. Essentially, because software engineers kind of made Scrum, that's the embedded sort of like, they get the bragging rights, although it could be anybody. Now, there is a thing about T-shaped skills, like all these developers should have their, they should be an expert in whatever their area is, but it's encouraged that they're an expert, and not an expert, maybe an accomplished amateur or something in some other area as well. Why do you think that is? Why do they do that?
Talking about the T chart and the skills, are you kind of hinting at cross functionality?
Yeah.
Is that what you're hinting at?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a really good word for the listeners. Cross functionality is a huge type, like a mindset slash hard skill we try to implement on our Scrum teams. And it's really good outside of Scrum if you want to go do anything in life. So cross functionality means like I can develop, I'll just be very technical here. A developer can do something in Python, and maybe they need to learn how a QA is testing something. And so maybe at some point in time, they can kind of help do a little QA, not on their own work, because there would be bias involved. You don't want yourself to investigate yourself, because you're going to probably be like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I could go down to the political route there and whatnot in our country, but I'm not. I'm going to keep politics out of this podcast. But yeah, the cross function, I'm going to have to write this down because I will forget. Cross functionality is very key to a high performing team. Doesn't have to be Scrum team, but on a Scrum team, we do like that. And you will get pushback for sure on it, because why do I, as a developer, need to learn some QA? Why do I, as a QA, need to learn something about business? Well, it's arguable both ways. It's arguable in favor and against. In favor that, hey, it helps us as a whole, as a team, we become smoother. If I take, being agile means if I can take you out of the picture, our output is going to go down, but quality, we really don't want quality to go down. And so we don't ever want a bottleneck. We don't want one person to have all the knowledge or the skills, because if they get sick or they get hurt or they leave the company, whatnot, they're just not there. Then you don't want work to come to a screeching halt. You want work to keep going, although it may be lesser, but it still goes forward. That is also a like a, not a definition, but like what it means to be agile. And on the flip side, the traditional side, if I were to pull that person in charge, like if you were to take the lieutenant out of the picture, and then all those people that depend on the lieutenant, they're just kind of like, uh-oh, what's going on? So there's this, they have a hierarchy, and they would go to the next person, would probably be like their sergeant. But you want to share those skills amongst each other so you don't just become dead in the water.
Yeah.
So the cross functionality is key, and it is not easy to achieve. And I personally have struggled with getting my team members, specifically devs and QAs, to kind of think and act cross-functional. I can guide them, and I can explain the benefits, I can explain the value and how it works, but people often see it as, I'm not getting paid to do QA work, and I'm not getting paid to do that work. I'm not going to do that. And now you gotta, okay, you planted the seed in the team. Now you got to talk to management. And then you get into this space of, well, their contract says that they're not a QA or they're not a developer. Why are they going into that realm and doing that type of work? So that would require a enterprise level agile mindset where your HR has to get involved. And it's a big thing, and this stuff does exist out there, like SAVE and agile at the enterprise level. Yeah, it's a thing. So I'm getting into implementation here, but it's very key to a high performing team, and you don't have to be Scrum to be cross functional. Like sometimes team members, I'll tell you a story that someone told me. They were on a high performing team, and they just thought it was the most amazing thing they'd ever seen. These folks, these guys specifically, had worked together side by side. I think it's like 3 or 4 of them for over a decade, and they together hopped from one company to another company. And this Scrum
Master,
almost
like a boy band.
Yeah, it was like a group of guys, and I believe they were developers in this case, here in the US, and they moved together as a little team and they did everything together. And they could finish each other's sentences. They just knew each other because they worked with each other for so long, and they would empower each other, and they'd be like, Saagar, you're not really good at Java, and I'm good at Java. I really want you to learn. And so they would push you. They would push each other. And I was like, that was an amazing story that I heard, and it really got me thinking. And so I took that and I try to kind of implement that with my team where I can, if I can. And and I try to show the team like, hey, I want to learn a lot. Can I like watch you QA? Can I watch you dev? Just know what your day-to-day life is like so I can understand you better. And that's the beginning. I feel like that's the beginning baby steps of cross functionality on a team. Is building that relationship first. You got to have the trust. You got to build the trust, and then you move on up the ladder. Kind of went full circle on this question.
No. So this is great. So basically, you said you didn't want to bring politics in the podcast. I'm going to get some at least theoretical politics here. Sounds Scrum. When I first learned it, when I first got certified, this is very much like anarcho syndicalism, right? But it only because there is no authority, and essentially there is some element of sort of shame level monitoring involved. Like in a culture, shame is kind of there for, let's just say, peer evaluation, if you think about it. And so there is that involved, and there is also a lot of integrity and courage. The assumption of integrity and courage is already there, right? So it almost seems like people in a Scrum team need to be super motivated. And it also looks like a Scrum team is the whole point of a very well functioning Scrum team. If you imagine a metaphor, is for those team members to become a super organism, which is more than a sum of its parts, right? So, okay, that is interesting. So that brings me to courage and transparency and grit. Courage, transparency, and grit. How important are these three elements in all team members working in the Scrum framework, and also in the executives and the senior management who implement policy at the company level?
So transparency and courage are two elements that are explicitly stated within Scrum.
Okay.
So courage, so you've got the values and principles, you've got 5 values, which I just so happened to write before this podcast.
Oh, nice.
Commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect. So going back to courage, what does that look like first? That looks like your team members have the empowerment or the confidence to stand up and talk about a problem and also help the other people on the team solve that problem, Scrum Master including. So courage is key. Now, in a perfect world, you have those elements, principles, values, all the way up the ladder, all the way up to the top of the level in the company. Then you have a really, really, I would say, a really healthy company that I would want to work for. And if you have up top and they keep churning to new people means new culture, means new ways of thinking. And I've worked for companies within an agile transition go from traditional into Scrum and see them, oh, these people love it, and it goes down the ladder, and you can see the courage and you can see the commitment and you can see people being focused and transparency because they understand these are the values in Scrum. But then you may work for an old company and they're just not used to that and they're set in their ways, and I'm going to tell you to do something, I don't care, do it, period. Oh, I said to do it, it's in this paper. There's lack of transparency maybe in some form or fashion. Transparency is also exceptional to having a healthy team or even a company. Like on the bigger level, town halls are to help bring some transparency to some level. And so that's at the big level. You go down to the team level, the transparency would be in Scrum, we have what's called daily stand-ups or scrumming ourselves, where we get together for a set amount of time and we huddle and we say, I've got this problem, I need help. And so you are in these consistent little check-ins, you are being transparent about problems. Well, behind that is the courage to talk about those problems and to show them, because some people will think, oh, if I'm talking about a problem, then that means I'm not a good developer. Not necessarily true. A healthy Scrum team will want to help that developer get better. And that's life. you're going to have some people that are seniors in skill level, and you're going to have some people that are newbies in skill level, and you want everyone to help out. That's how you get better. That's how we as a species get better. And then the grit, what is your meaning of grit? Is that kind of like a mix of courage and commitment, or confidence?
Courage, commitment, confidence, just basically perseverance, but with a like, you know, with a, I don't know, stoicism.
Okay, so kind of like a bit of mix of commitment. I'm gonna have to write. I'm writing this down because I will turn into a goldfish and forget. Well, so commitment and a bit of like focus and courage.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's kind of like taking these 5 principles, and I feel kind of like it's kind of condensed into the word grit.
Okay.
If that is the case, then absolutely. I mean, it's explicitly stated from Scrum.org, and then just when you start researching about Scrum, everyone, there's a reason that stuff exists, because people have been doing this over the years, and they meet and they refine and they want to get better, and they also need to have something to go off of. And so they've come together, these minds, and they've laid out these 5 values. And if you break down these values that represent Scrum, or rather uphold Scrum, then you will fall apart. Like if you just think of a building with columns, and each one of those columns is commitment, and one's courage, one's focus, one's openness, one's respect, and you kick down a column, the building falls down most likely. And each person would have those, hopefully, those 5 elements within them. And we're human, so that fluctuates. It's dynamic. And once you start losing that, you can start losing the output or quality of work, which impacts the project, which impacts getting to your stakeholders what they need. And it's a problem. So the Scrum Master would try to help do what they can to keep those 5 values upheld. And it's endless how you want to go about that. But if to give a little more Scrum background for your listeners, Scrum is a little prescriptive here in the sense of certain, we call them ceremonies. So we have what's called a sprint, we have what's called a retrospective, and a sprint review. And a retrospective is when we come together as a team at the end of, let's say, 2 weeks worth of work, and we talk about how things could be better, and not just focusing on like how can we do better as like getting the stakeholder what they want, but also like more relationship. How can I work better with you, Saagar? I feel like I may have upset you during the week when I said something about your work. I want to, you know, like that's a dedicated time, and we call it a ceremony where we as a team huddle together and kumbaya, you know, and you want to talk about it and get better. And that's where the openness comes into play. That's where the courage comes into play, and the respect comes into play. Because if I talk down to you, maybe I want to help you, but if I talk down to you, you're probably going to back off, or you get aggressive and offensive. And we can't have that on a team. We become lopsided, then we can't work in sync. We don't step together, we fall apart. And the Scrum Master is responsible, has a duty to help the team stay in sync. So going back to the grit, the transparency, and the courage, they are paramount on a, not just a Scrum team, but a team period. Like any team, baseball team, professional team, you know, your chess team, whatever.
Right. So I think it's making, I mean, all of these, let's just say, attributes in team members makes the team and the organization resilient, even anti-fragile, if you want to go down that far. And I think that is the reason why they really stress on it. So, but well, we are the final segment here, so I need to ask you a few quick questions before we end.
Sure.
In the nature versus nurture camp,
Okay.
but where are you when it comes to courage? So is courage just there in the quantum it needs to exist in, or can it be developed with the right environment?
So can it be developed? And what was the one before that?
So again, so in the nature versus nurture camp, where do you fall? So like what, yeah. Like,
Okay.
do you think it already exists in people, courage, or it doesn't? Or you can, you know,
does it
work on
already
it.
exist? Oh, wow, this is getting existential, psychological. I love this stuff. I feel like it exists in people, but over time, as we get older, our environment shapes us and how we deal with these things and how we express these things. If someone comes from an environment where nurturing was predominant, perhaps that person will be really good at bringing nurturing type element into their team. And so the nature part, so the nature is that already exists in us, and the nurturing is, can it be developed? Is that what where we're
Yeah.
going? I should know this. I've heard this a million times, but I should know this already. I definitely think human species, we definitely have stuff inside of us. It's just a matter of how can we get that out of us? Because we have things, I feel like, that we may not even know that we have the ability to do, and we can help someone. So I would say it's both. We have the nature of things. Courage exists in us. In this case, courage I'm going to use. And there's maybe someone who has more courage or skill set that can come to someone that doesn't have that level and nurture them to that level. So I think I think maybe it was that a paradox, but we have both, and yeah, I see it as both.
Okay, got it. All right. So, and then I guess finally, what I need to ask you is, you mostly worked in the software space, and again, that is also like dematerialized. So, physics issues don't come in over there. So, in what other industries or trades, to a degree, but yes, of course, because it's in it's in actual hard drives, and that's physical. In what? Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here.
It's okay. It's allowed.
What other industries do you think Scrum can benefit in the form of like a lot of value, adding a lot of value?
Other industries,
Or
Scrum,
trades.
value, trades. Okay. I, a few years ago, was in an agile community meetup here in Houston, and there were a lot of folks from different companies or organizations, and they were sharing knowledge, and it was really cool to see people curious of how I can take agile or Scrum and implement that where I'm at. And one person was from NASA, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. Like, to me, NASA's like cream of the crop. I love NASA. And so I was like, wow, this person wants to learn about agile and Scrum so they can implement it on their over there at their team. I don't know what they were building. That's unknown to me, but I have seen around me in the past 4.5 years, 5 years since I've been in Houston, companies here and organizations getting very curious about Scrum and Agile, and they're taking steps to understand it and see where they can implement it. I would say it's probably endless in what industries can utilize it, because it's more about the nature of things. And also, you can definitely take pieces of Scrum or Agile and do it, implement it anywhere. You can do it in your day-to-day chores. So I would say there's no boundary, there's no limit. That boils down to the mindset. So I think it can be used anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, one obvious example to me is publishing. I mean, they probably don't call it Agile or Scrum. They don't have those ceremonies, but I'm pretty sure it's very similar what they do when it comes to, especially like projects where multiple authors are working on a book. There are edits. I mean, it's in the system. So yeah, it has to be everywhere. It's good. I almost feel bad for folks who are in industries that kind of, not by choice, but just by some certain sociological and physical realities, just gravitate towards more command and control structures. If they don't like being there, that is. If they like being there, that's fine. Okay, all right. Well, that's all we had, Jonathan. I do thank you a lot. Do you have any parting thoughts?
I've had a really great time. Sorry for forgetting throughout the podcast. My brain can just shut off in the middle of speech. It's wild. Thanks for the patience with me as well, Saagar. I wish I had more. I feel like I could probably have been more refined in some of my answers. But this
Oh,
is
you
just
can come on again.
me, yeah, please invite me. I would love to talk more. Give you some like very specific examples of stuff that has happened on my teams and projects and what we did, and because I definitely have a plethora of experience from projects that were traditional and I started to implement Scrum, and what does that look like and how did that end up, and
Yeah.
just introducing some elements of Scrum or Scrum altogether.
Mm.
I've worked for newer companies and I've worked for very old companies.
Mm.
So I have a range of experience that I definitely would love to share.
Okay, I'm actually planning something as we speak. So when we go offline, I'm going to have a word with you about this.
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.